Achim. Achim had Eliud. Eliud had Eleazar. Eleazar had Mathan. Mathan had Jacob. Jacob had Joseph, Mary's husband. The Mary who gave birth to Jesus. The Jesus who was called Christ. There were 14 generations from Abraham to David. Another 14 from David to the Babylonian exile. And yet another 14 from the Babylonian exile, Christ. Matthew 1 verses 1 to 17 from The Message. A contemporary rendering of the Bible from the original languages by Eugene Peterson. There you have it, the family tree showing the lineage of Jesus Christ, highlighting our woman of courage, Rahab. Be sure to join me next time when we will re-engage man of courage Joshua in our series, Men and Women of Courage. Have a good afternoon.
Today's drink was brought to you by the New Testament Church of God, 65 Waltham Park Road, Kingston 11. The church that is one big family.
Tune in to Cliff Hughes Online Thursday, July 17 from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. as we broadcast live from the special Entrepreneurship Grants presentation ceremony at 61 Hagley Park Road. Through the local economic development support program, over $10 million will be awarded to 250 grassroots entrepreneurs in sectors such as health and wellness, food and agro-processing, art, craft, fashion, and more. Join us as we celebrate Jamaica's entrepreneurial spirit during Cliff Hughes Online Thursday, July 17 from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. It's the special Entrepreneurship Grants presentation ceremony. Catch the live stream on our YouTube channel at Nationwide 90 FM Live 2. All this and more only on Nationwide 90 FM, the new revolution in media. This broadcast is brought to you by the Social Development Commission.
We are making the transition to a republic. This means no more king but a Jamaican president as head of state. One people, one republic, one Jamaica. The time by the MLCA is
1 o'clock.
The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans by justice. The people's champion. Justice, justice for all. Justice under law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, the people demand. Right to life and security. Oh, what a joy, what a joy. Oh, what a peace. How great this country could be. Respecting your rights, respecting human rights. What a wonderful nation.
Happy Monday. It's a beautiful day. Happy to be here with our listeners. My name is Michael Jackson, Executive Director of JFJ.
I'm Jade Williams, Policy Research and Advocacy Manager at JFJ.
So thank you again for joining. Let's Talk Justice. It's another week to discuss important matters in the human rights and justice landscape. And, I just want to keep saying thank you to our listeners who are joining us via radio, those who are listening in via the Nationwide YouTube page, as well as those who are on JFJ's YouTube platform. There are those who are not listening in, but they do submit their answers each week because there's a small prize. And, I was saying to Jade, as one of our partners celebrate their 50th this year, we perhaps will start having some of the prizes being the meal deal. So you don't have to join another long line. You can just listening to the Justice program and you can get your meal deal where you can go to that particular company any day of the week and show your vouchers, yeah?
Yeah.
So we're discussing the matter of the proposed Elderly Care and Protection Act, and we're going to be joined by Senator Shireen Golding Campbell.
Yes. Yeah. All right. So we do have a Did You Know? this week, and
But it's not the meal deal.
and we have a trivia question this week. So, or did you know speaks to maintenance of elderly persons, and that comes from Section 10 of our Maintenance Act, and it is I said elderly persons, but I think I'm getting ahead of myself. It's really to support parents, right? Parents aren't necessarily elderly, so let's make that distinction.
My mother would agree with that sentiment.
Yes, but for every person in Jamaica who is not a minor, to the extent that that person is capable of doing so, have an obligation under this Maintenance Act to maintain their parents and grandparents, keeping in mind that the grandparents only come in where their child is unable to care for them, right? But that is person who is in need of care by age, so it can be an elderly person, physical, mental infirmary, or disability.
You know, when we're talking to Senator Golden Campbell, I'm going to ask the question about Lulu. Lulu was an elderly person living in my household. You know, Lulu stoned me one time and I wrote me down as a child with a stone. And you want to see me ducking under the cellar, filled with wasp and so on. So what would be my obligation for Lulu, who is not my mother, not my grandparent, but she was an elderly person in the household?
Yes.
You know,
yes.
So we'll have that discussion going forward about the family members with a Lulu. Not necessarily stoning from Lulu, but certainly the obligation that you will have. So listening, very important piece of legislation being proposed. So I'm quite excited to hear from our senator. Because...
I do have the trivia question.
Yeah, please.
So our trivia question for this week is, how many members were on that special select committee that considered the proposals for the Elderly Care and Protection Act? So you can respond by sending a WhatsApp to 239797583. You can send a message in the chat on YouTube or in our chat on Jamaicans for Justice YouTube, or you can send a message on Instagram.
All right. So the week that was, and I think I'm just going to speak briefly about the past several weeks on an important matter relating to governance in our country. And that's the adherence to the Access to Information Act. And just some things we see happening stemming from even last year and our own experiences with the ATI. Now, for those who are not aware, you have this piece of legislation passed in 2002. It has never been amended, but we've heard the different commitments from, information ministers over the years about making the necessary amendments to the Act. It was reviewed, and there was a Joint Select Committee report in 2011. Why am I making mention of this? The ATI is quite important for citizens to have access to government information, to know the decisions that were taken by government agencies and the process by which those decisions were made. Last year, if you remember, there was an ATI request made from the Jamaica Gleaner to the Tax Administration of Jamaica regarding some contracting and awards. And the Gleaner was told at the time that due to confidentiality issues and privacy issues, they would not get those awards due to the provisions within the Data Protection Act. And we had responded to indicate that the Data Protection Act is there to protect individual privacy rights. But we questioned whether or not the contracts or any award could very well be denied based on what the Data Protection Act is there for. Then we heard recently with the FID terms of reference surrounding the appointment of Dennis Chung, who's a reputable individual, let's be very clear. And you saw where the contract was reportedly given to the Gleaner, but not the terms of reference, which you know has been in the public space by the Office of the Services Commission. So you saw where the ATI was not adhered to in that manner. And then most recently, both colleagues here at Nationwide and at the Jamaica Gleaner made submissions to the Integrity Commission regarding some outstanding matters, for example, the audit into the audit report into the Prime Minister's affairs, which has been matter of public discussion. Now, my conversation here is around the adherence to the ATI Act and what can be reasonably denied, and my concerns when we look at our own experiences and that of our colleagues and these particular matters, whether or not the ATI Act again is not being adhered to, whether or not the denial of request they're reasonable. And I think there is much for us to look at, because I do have concerns around the Office of the Services Commission, denial of the ATI request there. That is something we need to probe a little bit more. Then when I look at the Integrity Commission's terse response based on what was shared in the public space recently, then I ask the question, do we have statutory conflict? No, some things are quite reasonable. If a matter is before the courts, reasonably so, the Act says you can't share that bit of information because there is legal proceedings underway. If one piece of legislation by statute says you can't share information, then I think the question is, do we revisit that particular statute, which is what you heard the Integrity Commission saying, that Section 56, which Jade, here at JFJ, we have called for to be amended, whether or not it was reasonably applied in this particular context, and whether or not the Integrity Commission's Act itself, how do we ensure that there's some latitude with it, given there are different interpretation of the confidentiality clauses within the Integrity Commission Act. So there's much for us to look at when it comes to access to information. And dare I say to journalists, use the ATI Act much more, greater frequency, and be careful with how you draft your request as well. Yes. That is important, because from what you have experienced, Jade, it seems as if some of the ATI officers are not fully au fait with the provisions within the ATI Act, which means they need appropriate training to adhere to citizens' requests. Because if citizens were using the ATI Act a little bit more, then the question is, when would we ever get a response on some of these agencies? So,
yes.
It's, and I know we're going to be having a show dedicated to the ATI Act on July 28th. I believe that's the date we have scheduled. But I think I had to raise it because I do have concerns personally in terms, and on behalf of JFJ, let me be clear, in terms of how the ATI Act is being utilized and whether or not some of the denial of those requests in some instances, they're quite reasonable.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mikhail. I have to agree, especially as you spoke about, the way the requests are worded. I find that, and again, I don't know if it's a matter of misunderstanding of the application of the Act, because I feel as though the Act makes it very clear that an ATI responsible officer should be doing everything they can, essentially, to ensure that you get the information that you're requesting, the correct information, to help you identify the documents that you need, and so on. And I find that, making a request and saying, oh, I want a report, instead of saying I want any document whatsoever, could result in you getting, oh, we don't have a report. But what they have is a spreadsheet, but they don't send the spreadsheet.
Yes.
So it's something that we have to scrutinize more deeply.
All right, so we have one of our more hardworking senators joining us. And I say more hardworking senators because this particular senator and some others have been doing remarkably well, in my humble opinion, in terms of what they contribute to the House. The upper house. And I think before we even start with Senator Golding Campbell, we also have to laud Senator Dr. Floyd Morris for exercising a provision that other members of parliament do have, and I say members of parliament between the lower and the upper house here, which is a private member's motion, yes. All right, which is the Elderly Care and Protection Act we're going to be talking about. And just to put in context, critical piece of legislation, over the years we've gotten several complaints about elderly abuse. If you recall some of the work undertaken by media practitioners, the Jamaica Gleaner, for example, into alleged abuse into several homes and care facilities. how do we ensure that we are responding to these things appropriately? So I recall in 2019, JFJ at the time had made a call for a dedicated piece of legislation to deal with elderly care, which would be similarly framed as you have the Child Care and Protection Act. So we have received complaints over the years, and I think we received at least 2 or 3 since the start of 2025. And unfortunately, our bandwidth did not give us the ability to respond to those complaints. But very, very good work. And, you know, we're happy that a call that we made in 2019, along with the National Council for Senior Citizens, you know, and other agencies, we're now seeing efforts being undertaken, and very important piece of legislation which we support.
Yes. As we should know, in 2024 October, the Parliament would have approved that private member's motion brought by Senator Floyd Morris, and formulated the Elderly Care and Protection Act committee to review the proposals. So the committee was headed by Senator Golding Campbell, and in June 27th of 2025, the committee tabled its report in Parliament. And we would have seen since then another case that has raised some alarm, that matter of Viola Destin, who was found, her mummified body was found in her home, having been missing for 2 years. So we're going to be looking at that legislation, and we are joined by Senator Golding Campbell. Senator, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to your listeners.
Good afternoon, Senator. You know, as we were saying, kudos to you and the select committee on such extraordinary work so far. You've moved quite quickly, as a matter of fact, because we know sometimes, you know, the things are there languishing in Parliament. So, you know, we just have to issue our congratulations. And I see where you've made a call just last week, urging your fellow parliamentarians to fast track the legislation. But what we wanted to discuss, Senator, so the public can really understand, what exactly are we trying to achieve? What is the broad objective of this piece of legislation before we go into some of the finer details?
Well, I think the broad objective is to have a singular law that frames the way. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing.
Okay, that frames the way we treat with older persons in our community. It frames the way we care for them, frames the kind of protections that are in place for them, and it starts from the pivotal point of enshrining the rights of older persons in law, which is what one of the biggest recommendations coming out of the committee's work.
Okay, thank you so much, Senator. We take the break, and then we pick up with some of the, you know, specific proposed provisions that are being made for this piece of legislation.
Right.
When you want the food shell and make the rice well, just gimme me Kendall. Ready down. Kendel. Gimme me Kendall.
Another quality product from the CariMed Group.
Just gimme me Kendall.
The time by Kendall Foods. The taste of quality is
116.
Black Stallion, formulated with natural herbs and regular usage, will improve strength, stamina, and performance. Black Stallion now has horny goat weed to give maximum satisfaction. Black Stallion now has strong back roots to strengthen your upper and lower back muscle. Know your Black Stallion.
For strength, stamina, and performance, Black Stallion, the bedroom tonic. Bring out the stallion in you.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We're discussing the proposed Elderly Care Protection Act, and we're joined by Senator Golding Campbell. Senator, before the break, you were telling us, the main objective of the act is to ensure that we have that framework where we know how to treat our elderly persons. I think we kind of got ahead of ourselves. And for our listeners, if we could frame what are some of the challenges that we were trying to address? We had a few complaints ourselves at JFJ, but what were you seeing as policymakers that led to wanting to do this?
So just very quickly, I know we have limited time. Legislators do look at policy. They have to look at policy in order to craft law. But really, the main policymakers is the executive government and the ministerial teams. And there are a number of reports that the National Council for Senior Citizens can tell you about in terms of the interactions they had with older persons suffering sexual abuse, physical abuse, abandonment, lack of care, neglect. The Caribbean Community of Retired Persons under the leadership of Mrs. Jean Laurie also spoke to the committee about some of the horrors that older persons are experiencing in their communities. Another issue was the difficulty in accessing sometimes services. So with all of the things that we were told in terms of the difficulties that older persons have, we had to focus on one goal, which was how we craft law, because not all problems are solved by enacting a law. Some problems are solved by simply instituting and implementing an administrative program, by ensuring that it has proper funding and so on. So I was very careful with the committee to make sure we were focused on what our scope and our mandate was. And to that end, we recommended a few legislative measures. I spoke about the rights of older persons before, because that's really what grounds all the discussions about older persons and the difficulties they face, the access they need to have. We talk about the right to autonomy, the right to fair treatment, the right to not be discriminated against because of your age, the right to care and protection, and the right to access that older persons need to have.
Yes.
And those were one of our first recommendations in the report.
Senator, how are we striking the balance between autonomy and some of the vulnerabilities of being an older person? And I ask this question because sometimes people assume because you're older, you should get off the road, you shouldn't have a driver's license, you shouldn't be active members in politics and other areas. So how do we strike that balance based on the discussions being had so far?
I think the balance is struck by recognizing exactly what I just discussed, which is the rights. I think when we recognize the rights of older persons, then we frame their context in a different way. There are vulnerabilities that older persons have as they get older, but we have to find a way to respect their rights while crafting solutions to protect them when they have vulnerabilities and to assist them. So the committee was very much focused on that. We had long discussions towards the end of the life of the committee about things like guardianship orders and powers of attorney, tools that can impact the autonomy of older persons. And we had conversations about the mechanism in which an older person can benefit from those tools and the protections that we need to have in place, which led us, of course, to affirm our position that we needed to have an office of the older person's advocate, similar to the children's advocate, but who was focused on older persons, who could ensure that they were protected, who could monitor them, who could step in and intervene in matters where older persons needed to be protected. An independent body, meaning a commission of parliament, who was autonomous in that role.
Who would take reports, complaints?
Certainly.
Yes, okay.
Certainly.
The other thing that jumped out at me, Senator, would be the obligation of family members and caregivers. And I was sharing, my own extended family experience, those big yard situation wherein you can't identify the grandchild, so to speak, but you do have an elderly person living in the household who is ultimately responsible for Lulu. Lulu is an elderly person who was in my house growing up, but I don't even know what bloodline I have with Lulu. But if I were older now as an adult living there, what would be my obligation, who is not my grandparent, but is just an elderly person?
Well, that's the thing, Mikhail, because right now there is not that general duty of care. I mean, I guess we all have a duty of care for each other, but there's not that statutory duty of care. And the committee did propose that a statutory duty of care be enacted in relation to certain prescribed persons. Medical professionals, for example, caregivers, for example, and prescribed persons, meaning, of course, that, an authority could add a category of persons to that list at a future date. But currently, the Maintenance Act, I think I heard Jade reading it just as I was coming on. The Maintenance Act requires you to look after your dependents who may be your parent or your grandparent, and it specifies parent or grandparent. So I would imagine that if you were to have a matter in court in relation to maintenance, and you couldn't trace that bloodline, that you really couldn't be held responsible unless there was some other way that you could establish some sort of familial bond.
Yes.
But that's one of the gaps that we've identified, and one of the reasons that we said, look, there needs to be a general duty of care for persons in certain roles. And so if you're the caregiver in a home, then our proposal would address you, because it would say, look, you have been the responsible person. As the responsible person, then you are the person who needs to maintain this older person.
Yes. And thank you so much, Senator, for that. And I know we had the discussion just now in regarding duty of care, perhaps within the context of providing some support, whether that be financial, medical, or otherwise. But would there be some duty to report if one sees abuse happening, as you would have within the context of the Child Care and Protection Act? What is that duty of the neighbor or any other member within the family setting when it comes to duty to report abuse or anything else of a similar vein?
So the committee did recommend that there be established in law a duty to report cases of abuse. And we went even a little further than that. And we said that there's not only a duty to report, but there is also a duty of the authority to whom that report is made to act. So that a complaint can't just be made and it sit in file 13 or, just sit in a black hole over time, but it must also be a complaint that is investigated and acted upon to ensure the protection and the care of the older person about whom the complaint has been made. So yes, there is that duty, but that's where you get into the conversation about the vulnerabilities, and one of the things the committee was impressed upon to do is to establish a definition of elder abuse, which we have proposed. We have recommended that such a specific definition be established, and that it include all forms of abuse against older persons. So it's not just physical abuse, it's not just sexual or emotional abuse, but also financial abuse, because one of the things we were told was that we have older persons, and people have heard about this anecdotally, being scammed all the time out of their money and their property. And they have no recourse, and oftentimes just don't have the ability to access any recourse for what has happened to them.
And is psychological abuse one of the categories as well?
Psychological, yes. Psychological, physical, emotional, sexual, financial were those that we named. But the gravamen of the recommendation was to expand, to have an expansive definition of elder abuse that would encompass all the various forms of abuse that older persons endure.
I wanted to ask, one of the challenges that we've seen when we're looking at legislation that protects the rights of persons, vulnerable persons, is enforcement. And I don't know what, or if you could share what mechanisms the committee considered to ensure that the sections in the legislation would be adhered to, if there are any penalties that you considered for breaches under it.
To be fair, we stopped short of diving into penalties in relation to the enforcement of rights. And this might be a good juncture just to contextualize the work the committee did. I mean, what we have here is a report with a broad framework, maybe a little bit more than a broad framework this time around, of what this law should look like. But there's also going to have to be another stage. There's going to have to be a stage where the technocrats in the ministries, in the responsible ministry, which at this point would be Ministry of Labor and Social Security, takes a look at what the committee has done, and asserts their own policy position, has, consultations with stakeholders to finalize what would be the drafting instructions that would reduce itself to law. But in terms of enforcement of rights, that, I hope that process would sort of fine tune that. But you're right, you put, a right in place, and it if you don't have a penalty, it can be difficult to enforce. But one of the things that the enshrining in law does is put on notice not just your neighbor, not just the informal local community, but it also puts on notice institutions. And so it is a sort of social re-engineering of the society in terms of how do we treat with older people. And I know that was one of the points Minister Charles and I had spoken about as I gave him regular updates as the committee was doing its work.
And that's Minister Pernell Charles Jr.
Yes, sorry. Yes, there are two of them, aren't there? Or there were two of them. Yes, and so I know he was very much, we had conversations about the rights issues, how that would impact the society and how people would have to pay attention to that to change how they provided for older persons. So if you recall, the Disabilities Act came into play, and now there's a requirement that there is an accessibility for disabled persons. So you're putting up a building now, and you must have a ramp. You must have a way for them to move a wheelchair in if they use one. Now, not everybody has it, but there is certainly a penalty in terms of, if you don't have an accessible public building, that you're operating contrary to law. So I think it will change.
Senator, we have to take the break. Please hold that thought.
Sure.
At the Jamaica Customs Agency, we care for our employees, customers, stakeholders, citizens, and our country. Customs cares. The temperature by the Jamaica Customs Agency is...
It's a warm day here in Jamaica, 30 degrees Celsius out in the west and 31 in Kingston.
It's Monday, get over your blues. Or Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. The E-Zone is here for you. With this thing, Honeybee.
And Karim Boyatings
from 3 to 5 p.m. on Nationwide 90 FM.
We've got your entertainment news.
Then we want to hear your views. Why you said?
Jump in the mix.
Or the hot seat.
Don't miss our brain busters.
Or the crazy giveaways.
Let's talk fashion.
Send us your outfit of the day. Ooh, cutesy. Very demure.
Are you looking for love?
Come on one of our blind dates. Send your request to ezoneblindates@gmail.com. That's ezoneblindates@gmail.com.
And stay tuned for your confessions.
These are my confessions.
Share them with us at ezoneconfessions@yahoo.com. I mean, is this planet Earth?
Is it?
I don't know. Let me check. Either way, it's got a buzz.
And a bugger thing.
Ow! Ow!
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We are discussing what Jade and I are here speaking about just how important this piece of legislation is. You mentioned something before we went on break, Senator, regarding that institutions being put on guard. What are some of the expectations and the obligations of private institutions? Because again, we've heard some of the more alarming incidents over the years coming from how some of these institutions operate. Is there another set of responsibility, the enforcement issue? How do we deal with some of these private institutions as is being proposed in the law?
Let's just say this. I'm not sure I would want to go into the nitty-gritty of that because we're still in a stage of we need to flesh out and have more discussions with stakeholders in terms of how this must land in a draft bill. But the fact of the matter is that there's going to, whatever bill finally comes back to the Parliament, it is going to require a great deal of public education. You're going to have to consult with the people, consult with the business community, consult with the churches. We're going to have wide consultation so that everyone understands what we're trying to do and buys into it. I mean, that's really the road to changing how we do business normally. But it's something that we can do. We have the capacity to do. We do it all the time.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other provisions or proposals that you believe the public should be aware of?
Well, I think that the two big ones I would highlight would be our discussions about the grant of powers of attorney. Yes. And our discussion about guardianship orders. And it's funny because just this weekend I got a call from somebody who wanted to put in place what they thought was a power of attorney for a relative who may be declining. And I had to tell him, I said, look, this power of attorney is going to be okay for now while the relative is still able. But when the relative becomes unable, the power of attorney becomes invalid. I think a lot of older persons think that if they grant a power of attorney to their children, that whatever happens, the children will be able to use that power of attorney to look after their affairs, and that is not true. So applications for guardianship, giving the child the authority to be able to, or whoever it is, the authority to be able to manage your affairs as an older person when you become unable is really the way to go. The difficulty with that, the committee realized, is that there are gaps. And so we are going to look at closing those gaps. And I'm so happy to hear my Minister Charles really affirmed that the ministry was on the way to drafting this. But the gaps that exist are, for instance, the difficulties in accessing the court for guardianship applications, the requirement to have a medical practitioner who you've seen in the last 14 days write a report, the fact that you are the person who can be appointed as guardian must be your nearest relative living in the jurisdiction. So that puts obviously some limitations and some restrictions on who can be the guardian. Many older persons don't have any children here or a spouse remaining, and who they have that looks after them and looks out for them is a friend or a church sister or a church brother. And the guardianship process doesn't allow for those people to be appointed guardians or to apply to be appointed guardians. So those are the gaps that have to be closed. They may not be closed in this specific law. It would make this law a little unwieldy, because we did recognize that there were some facets that sort of stood outside of the framework and were applicable to other persons in the society, not just older persons. And so we recommended that the establishment of durable and lasting powers of attorney that would subsist beyond the incapacity of the older person, that be established in a separate law, because it would apply to older persons and younger persons and anybody, to be frank, and that the guardianship framework be overhauled to make it easier for applications for guardianship to get to the court, and to make it clearer to the court the kinds of things that they needed to consider in granting those orders.
All right, great. All right, I think that's it for us. Thank you so much, Senator. Really appreciate you're taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. Again, kudos.
I thank you for the opportunity, because I think this has probably been the most granular conversation I've had, and I'm not surprised it happened here at JFJ's session.
Yes.
But please, I'm asking you to continue to monitor this. It's going to take a little time to get it done, but I think certainly my government is committed to getting this done, and I expect to see it in short order as soon as we get through the next couple months.
I won't be cheeky. I'm in my JFJ capacity in terms of what that couple months will look like in terms of the date.
You're welcome to be cheeky, because I have a whole heap of mouth too.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you always.
Thanks, Raquel. Thanks, Jade. Good talking to you.
I always have to say it, because Jade, I watch my parliament and I watch my Senate every week. And if I miss, I go back on YouTube and go scroll back.
Yes.
I don't miss the news, which is why my mother said my blood pressure is as high as it is. But, when you see our members working, you have to say kudos always, because, me and the slamming of the bench, the desk, I can't manage too much of that. And the private member motion, this is a bipartisan effort. You see how quickly, and they're building on things, because there was a cabinet, there was a green paper, I believe, before. So they're building on what was. But, it's good work being done. And I think far too many of us can think of incidents over the years and within our community. I grew up in a big yard, so I was even joking with you off here with Lulu. So I don't know what my line is to Lulu, but I know Lulu is a family member, and what would be my obligation and the duty. Other jurisdictions, they have legislation that really put duty on citizens to act generally towards, you're passing somewhere and you see something, you turn a blind eye. We are not that caring as we should be, because you heard it in the media report last week. Close to 2 years, a family member was missing, and you asked the question, how come?
How come no inquiries were made? No one saw her? And it's
How many of us with grandparents go ensure the hair is trimmed, go land 2 big plaits in the hair and so on, and read the Bible? I used to read the Bible to my, this is Granny Betty now, you know. He had Mama, Granny Betty, and Lulu. And I used to read the Bible. That was my duty as a child, you know, to keep that connection, to keep the memory sharp, and so on. And are we seeing that type of family connection if it's not immediate family?
Yeah.
No, in today's context, we're too removed.
I think we're too removed. I agree with you. I also think that there is some level of, I don't know, apathy towards our elders, you know. They kind of don't exist in the realm of our minds, and that needs to change.
Yeah, our youngsters. It can't be that you only visit Granny when you want to get a little money in the Christmas card.
I think we also need to think about how because even as we think about caring, in this case that has brought this to our attention again with Miss Destiny, she had a caregiver that was being supported to stay there and look after her. And I think sometimes when we're the persons, you know, supplying a caregiver, we think that's sufficient. You know, the caregiver is there, so they'll tell us if they need anything, and they'll tell us if they're okay, and there's no need for you to do that personal check-in. But
because sometimes the caregiver is just giving the basic, just the finances, because you're receiving some of the older persons, they're on pension, NIS benefits, so that is being expended.
Right.
But in terms, because the last complaint I believe we got at JFJ, it wasn't financial gap there. It was, from what we gathered listening in, when we discussed the complaint, it was more, nobody is sitting down and just talking to me. So the feeling of loneliness and neglect was what we saw, you know, coming out in that particular complaint, the last one we got, which is why I asked the question about psychological abuse, because sometimes the words that we use and so on, you know. So I think we all need to take stock. You know, I won't toot my horn on the road as much, for example. You know, we have to look within. And I heard, I adjusted my language because Dr. Peter and Baker, I heard her in my head just now with the autonomy bit and the use of language, elderly versus older person and so on. So Dr. Baker just, you know, I'm learning. Because sometimes Dr. Baker run out on X, you know, so I have to ensure she's a JFJ member, so, you know, I have to adhere to certain things and be respectful. Autonomy important. We have to take the break, or can we just go ahead? Okay. There was an article, Jade, written by Alicia Dunkley Willis of the Jamaica Observer. Excellent journalist, may I say, how she covers events. And she wrote an article talking about comments made by Justice David Batts recently at the Industrial Dispute Tribunal's 50th anniversary luncheon and awards ceremony recently. He was, guest speaker, I think. And Justice Batts touched on several areas of constitutional reform, which I just wanted you and I to have a discussion around, because we are in the silly season.
Yes.
And we won't be touching politics now. I want to be very clear. And when I say politics, we tend to use politics in that partisan way. Talking about democratic participation of citizens based on Justice Batts' comments and what Observer wrote on within the context of constitutional reform. Some of these issues, we had in our own submission to both the Constitutional Reform Committee and the Joint Select Committee reviewing the Constitutional Amendment.
Republic.
Thank you, because
Constitutional Amendment Republic
you
Act.
saw the blank look on my face just now as I tried to gather a memory. It's my birthday this weekend, so old age reaching.
Right? That's why you're so concerned about the elderly legislation. Okay.
Yeah, but some of the things that Justice Batts touched on, last general election, we had 37% of our population participating in exercising their right to vote. And he asked the question whether or not the low participation is due to voter apathy or as a form of protest. And it's a little bit of both, and I think we need to probe the reasons behind it. What we mean by a minority government, when you have low percentage of the population being the ones electing, a ruling political party, the government of the day, the executive. And how do we make recommendations so we can increase participation? And he touched on certain things, for example, the cabinet and how we appoint the cabinet. The cabinet, which is where our ministers with portfolio, Minister of Health, the Minister of National Security, or ministers without portfolio with responsibility for something sit. And those individuals come from the lower house in a number. And then no less than 2, no more than 4 would come from the Senate. But he asked the question, should the Prime Minister, for example, be free to choose outside of Parliament or to any citizen? For example, how the US appoint department heads, with the exception of the department head of education, which or the president was trying to cut that area. Should the Prime Minister be free to choose? Or should we have a process rather, wherein any person so appointed by the Prime Minister must be approved by Parliament? So, those were some of the things that Justice Batts just threw out there as we think about Constitution. I'm not sure what your thought is.
Boy.
For you you're still young.
Yeah. I have a few thoughts. I do agree with you that it's a matter of both apathy and protest why persons aren't turning out to vote.
You think these changes will make a difference in if we make changes to, and that was one. We can discuss the others.
I do think that why he would suggest that is because that kind of gives the public a greater hand in these, maybe not in the cabinet decisions, but in the choosing of the cabinet, which then I guess allows them to feel more ownership of what the cabinet ends up doing when they do their work, which I think could help, because I think ownership of what happens in the country is important for persons to want to contribute to that, to want to vote, to want to care about it, right? So yeah, I do think that's something that can help. I think generally we have to look at those strategies that can help people feel connected to the issues that we're discussing.
Last week's class, because I teach Introduction to Politics, I challenged some of my students, but they make me feel old though, It's the worst thing talking to people who are 18 to 21 years old. Yes. They make you feel, well, look, a gray hair is standing right up. But one of the challenge I gave, because a couple students, they had no clue when I talk about head of state and, going through the branches of government. And they said, that is why we don't participate. So I challenged them. I said, but you don't know much you participate in anything. And they said, but nobody not teaching us. So it was a back and forth. And I appreciated the converse. I was just being cheeky, pushing back at them because I also wanted to challenge their own thought. Because you remember I said to you, one didn't even know what name TVJ.
Yeah, right. Yes.
Right? Yes. And I said, listen to Cliff Hughes online. And they said, miss, and so on. But you're challenged. And when we had the conversation, they said, but if I don't have any say in anything, why should I have an interest? So we went into what we're replacing the head of state, the monarchy, with our president. And they said, but if this is the power of the Governor General, why am I going to be paying somebody else? And that was another issue that Justice Batts apparently raised in his statement, or raised rather, in his speech, in terms of what are the powers of this new president. And Jay, that was another thing that we also put in our submission before the Joint Select Committee, that we don't want to switch out. Because if you read the Constitution, and it doesn't necessarily say powers of the Governor General, it's
it has
throughout.
duties throughout.
Yeah. So, for example, signing off on bills before it officially becomes law. What do we want that process to be like? Do we want just a system wherein the Governor General or the President in the new dispensation acts upon the advice of the Prime Minister after consulting with the leader of the opposition? Or do we want the President to have more discretionary powers? That was another thing. Do we want the system to remain where the Prime Minister appoints? Or do we want a voting process within Parliament, or do we want a direct election by the people? So Justice Batts wrote that, mentioned that. So, what do you think? As a youngster now, not as a JFJ person articulating JFJ's policy.
As a youngster talking about what I would want to see the president do, I think I have liked the idea of having the Parliament vote for the president or having the public vote for the president.
You come like a JFJ position you come back with now, Jane.
For real. That's really, really what I thought, right?
Okay.
In terms of the powers that the president should have, that's something that I have struggled with. And I don't know if I have really come to a conclusion on my personal position on what that should look like. Because I appreciate that this president will be Jamaican, right? We'll have
first and foremost the roots that
are here, yes. Right? And the interest is here. The president has no interest outside of, or should have no interest outside of the well-being of Jamaicans, right? But I don't want an executive president. Right? I want a non-executive president because I think that...
But JFJ really converted,
I think that the people...
Yes.
If the people don't have a full say in what it is that the president does, then I don't want the president to be able to do much, or if they don't have a full say in to get the president there, then I also don't want the president to do much, right? So that's where my concern comes from, because I find that your parliamentarians and your prime minister, for the most part, your parliamentarians, they're selected by you. They're your MPs and your so on. They're people that you have voted for. And so when they make decisions in Parliament, those are decisions that you have sanctions essentially based on your vote. So if it goes to the president and then the president has powers beyond, or say the president had the exact powers that the Governor General had, and no ceremony doesn't matter because they are from here and this is our
reading the throne speech that was nicely prepared, right, rather than writing his own throne speech, for example, which will become the president's speech.
Exactly. Right? So like, do I want that person to be able to do anything to the decisions that my elected officials have already
but the senator's not elected either.
Well, that's true.
So would you want the power to elect your senators as they do in the United States?
No, I don't think so.
And by the way, just to say, the US, it's not electing the full slate of senators one time. It's based on a rotating basis. Well, may I make up words today on air? Rotating basis, yeah? So we can have we elect how many amount of senators this time around. In another year we have another election. You just want everything in one go and we elect the senators. And by the way, the US does that for some continuity. Thinking about it?
Yeah, I'm thinking
I think I want a segment with just about 4 young people in here. We can have some of these discussions.
I'm so
pleased. I don't think you're so young because I want to call your age on air. But you are convinced that you're still youth. So I will accommodate you.
Yeah, but I think it's a good conversation to have. And I agree.
This last one though, not being cheeky now. Let's forget the words that MP Warmington used. He said If you don't like the MP, vote directly for this person. And these are the things people struggle with when they go to the ballot. Boy, me like my MP, but I vote for this MP is a vote for that political party. Do you think we should, vote for a political party separate from the MP and then vote for the Prime Minister directly? And I say this because JFJ recommended something like that. It's called a mixed member proportional system used in Germany, New Zealand. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I like that.
You like that one there?
Yeah, I do, because I find that a lot of people would vote on issues if they felt like they could. But because the stakes are, I have to vote to make my party win, you know, even though you may have voted for a member that is not a part of your party, but would have been better for your community or has worked better in your community, you don't feel like you can give them that vote, right? So I do think that would be helpful in reducing even some of that apathy, because you come to a decision like that, you maybe decide instead to not vote. Because if I vote, it's a vote for this party who is causing havoc in my community. But if I vote for the MP, I'm abandoning my party who I need to win the whole election, right? So it is something that I think we should look at separating,
So, and by the way, the mixed member proportional system, it's not easily understood. So it's going to require a whole cultural change. But I think it's something we need to talk about a little bit more.
I would argue that our current parliamentary system not easy to understand either. So.
And we have one of the easier understood models, the first past the post system. If I had to take the time and go explain proportional representation, which is what Guyana uses, it may take a little bit more time. Last thing though, Justice Batts said entrenchment of key institutions.
Yes.
We spoke to, for example, Integrity Commission being entrenched, but he extended it to Indicom and other agencies. What say you? Should Indicom be in the Constitution protected?
Yeah, I'm for that. I'm for that. Yeah, because I think that these agencies need to feel protected in order for them, especially an agency that is monitoring some of our more powerful departments and other agencies. I think that they need to have that security in the work that they're doing, and to know that their systems won't be so easily changed based on whatever disciplinary actions or whatever decisions they end up making.
Yes, and when the public give backlash, people quickly resign or don't want an extension of their positions. So that's another reality as well. All right, that's where we have to leave it. But I hope you enjoyed the show, except that Jade is not finished with her trivia and who won.
Right.
Yeah.
I am about to tell you who won because I think someone told me. Did they? No? Okay, so I don't know who won. But
I thought Vanessa was busy listening in on the show and not watching who won. But no, she's watching.
The trivia question that we asked was how many members were on the Special Select Committee that looked at the Elderly Care and Protection Act proposals. We did not get a winner.
News commentator is sleeping this week.
I don't think she heard the question. But the answer is 7. Right, so we had Senator Golding Campbell, who we saw, Floyd Morris, Gabriella Morris, Charles Sinclair.
I'm of no use to you today. Yeah, right. So we have 7. Google it.
Yes.
All right, but thank you so much, Jade, and for playing our youth advocate today. Really appreciate you.
I did my best.
You did your best. All right. All right. Have a good Monday.
I'm Jade Williams.
And I'm Michael Jackson.
Jamaicans, by justice, the people's champion. Justice for all. Justice under law. Justice, Jamaica the known. Right to life, right to liberty. Out of many we are one in a Jamaica. Make it a better place for the boys and girls. Created equal by the creator. For equal rights and opportunities. No to unlawful detention and police brutalization. Class, gender, race or religion. We not tolerate discrimination.
To join the fight against injustice, contact us at 755-4524 or JamaicансForJustice.org.
The people's champion.
Tune Tune in to Cliff Hughes Online Thursday, July 17 from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. as we broadcast live from the special Entrepreneurship Grants presentation ceremony at 61 Hagley Park Road. Through the local Economic Development Support Program, over $10 million will be awarded to 250 grassroots entrepreneurs in sectors such as health and wellness, food and agro-processing, art, craft, fashion, and more. Join us as we celebrate Jamaica's entrepreneurial spirit during Cliff Hughes Online Thursday,